There is a moment in some relationships when nothing visibly changes, yet everything begins to feel different. Nobody leaves. Nobody says goodbye. The house remains the same, the conversations still happen, the routines continue, and yet something inside the emotional atmosphere slowly disappears. Most people cannot identify the exact day it happens. They only remember the feeling. The feeling that the person sitting beside them suddenly feels farther away than someone standing on the other side of the world. At first you tell yourself that nothing is wrong. People become tired. Life becomes difficult. Responsibilities increase. Stress changes people. You repeat these explanations because the alternative is much more frightening. The alternative is admitting that the warmth you once felt so naturally is no longer reaching you. You begin noticing small things that should not matter but somehow do. They stop asking how your day felt and start asking how your day went. They stop looking at you when you speak. Their laughter arrives later. Their curiosity becomes smaller. The conversations that once wandered through dreams, fears, memories, and desires slowly become practical. Necessary. Predictable. You continue speaking because silence feels uncomfortable now. You continue sharing because you remember a version of them that listened differently. But somewhere during these conversations you begin feeling something you have never felt before. You feel alone beside someone who used to make loneliness disappear. That realization changes people. Because rejection does not always arrive as abandonment. Sometimes it arrives as emotional distance that nobody wants to acknowledge. You can spend months sitting beside someone who is quietly leaving you while their body remains in the room. You feel them becoming colder in ways you cannot explain to anyone. You notice that your excitement no longer creates excitement in them. Your sadness no longer pulls them closer. Your presence no longer changes the emotional atmosphere. And eventually you begin trying harder. Not because you want attention. Because you want proof that you still matter. You become more patient than usual. More understanding. You ignore things that hurt you because you are afraid of creating distance. You stop mentioning disappointments because you do not want to become difficult. You begin accepting emotional conditions that an earlier version of yourself would never have tolerated. That is one of the quietest forms of self-betrayal. You slowly abandon parts of yourself to protect a connection that is already changing. You stop speaking naturally and start speaking carefully. Before saying something, you wonder whether it will annoy them. Before expressing disappointment, you wonder whether it will push them farther away. Before sharing your emotions, you wonder whether your feelings have become inconvenient. And without realizing it, you become smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. The frightening part is that people rarely notice this while it is happening. They only recognize it later, when they look back and realize they spent months asking permission to exist comfortably inside someone else's world. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from watching someone become emotionally alive around other people. You sit quietly while they laugh harder, speak more freely, show curiosity, ask questions, tell stories, and reveal a version of themselves that no longer appears when they are with you. You do not become jealous immediately. First you become confused. Because the person you miss is sitting right in front of you. You begin remembering how they used to look at you. The excitement in their voice. The effort they made without being asked. The way your arrival changed their mood. The way they noticed small things about you. Now you walk into the room and nothing changes. And that hurts people more than rejection itself. Because rejection says, I do not choose you. But emotional indifference says, your presence no longer affects me. People can survive heartbreak. What they struggle to survive is becoming emotionally invisible. You begin carrying every conversation. If you stop speaking, silence arrives. If you stop asking questions, nothing continues. If you stop reaching emotionally, the distance becomes impossible to ignore. The relationship survives because one person keeps breathing life into it while the other quietly learns how to live without it. And that realization creates humiliation. Because you remember when things felt effortless. You remember when they wanted more time, more conversation, more closeness. Now you find yourself grateful for basic warmth. A small moment of affection feels enormous. A simple expression of care feels like relief. You begin celebrating things that once happened naturally. That is when people start losing themselves. The standards become lower. The needs become smaller. The expectations disappear. You tell yourself not to ask for too much. Not to need too much. Not to feel too much. You become understanding even when you are hurting because you fear that honesty might create even more distance. The terrifying part is realizing how much power another person's attention now has over your emotional world. Your confidence begins changing. Your self-worth becomes unstable. You start wondering whether you have become boring, ordinary, forgettable. You compare the person you are now to the person you used to be when they wanted you. And perhaps the most painful realization is this. You do not only miss who they were. You miss who you were when they loved you. You miss your confidence, your ease, your emotional freedom. The version of yourself that did not constantly wonder whether you were enough. Because rejection changes identity before it changes relationships. You begin doubting your attractiveness, your personality, your importance. You analyze your words after conversations end. You replay moments inside your head searching for evidence. You remember their expressions, their silence, their distance. The mind becomes a courtroom. Every memory becomes evidence. Every moment becomes another attempt to understand what changed. But the truth is often much simpler and much more painful. People stop noticing what feels permanent. The emotional certainty that once felt safe slowly removes the fear of losing you. The effort becomes unnecessary. The curiosity becomes smaller. The emotional tension disappears. Nobody notices it immediately because these changes happen quietly. One conversation becomes slightly colder. One evening becomes slightly quieter. One embrace becomes slightly shorter. And eventually an entire relationship feels different. The most disturbing part is that people continue loving someone long after they stop feeling loved by them. They remain loyal to memories. They stay attached to old versions of people. They continue fighting for emotional reactions that used to happen naturally. And every failed attempt creates another wound. You begin speaking less because your words no longer seem to arrive anywhere. You begin hiding disappointment because expressing it changes nothing. You begin sitting beside someone while internally grieving the relationship they no longer realize is disappearing. Some relationships die long before anyone leaves. The bodies remain. The routines remain. The names remain. But the emotional atmosphere changes completely. And that is where rejection truly begins. Not when somebody walks away. When somebody stops seeing you. The human heart can tolerate pain surprisingly well. What it struggles to tolerate is becoming ordinary to someone who once made you feel unforgettable. Because all human beings secretly want the same thing. They want to feel significant inside another person's world. They want their presence to matter. They want to believe that their absence would be felt. When that belief disappears, something inside the identity begins collapsing. You stop asking whether they still love you. You start asking whether you still matter. And those questions destroy people quietly. You notice yourself accepting less affection, less attention, less emotional effort than you once required because losing the relationship feels more frightening than losing yourself. You become patient with coldness, understanding toward distance, forgiving toward neglect. Not because you are weak. Because attachment makes people betray themselves. It convinces them that preserving connection is more important than preserving dignity. Eventually you realize that the person who fears losing the relationship more often becomes the person who suffers inside it. Their emotions become heavier. Their silence becomes painful. Their needs become embarrassing. Their love becomes something they apologize for. And slowly they begin disappearing. The most painful thing about rejection is not hearing that somebody no longer wants you. It is realizing that you spent months watching your own value disappear inside their eyes. You watched yourself become less exciting, less important, less noticed, less necessary. And every attempt to recover your place only seemed to push it farther away. Perhaps that is why rejection feels so devastating. Because it forces people to confront a terrifying possibility. What if the person who once saw something extraordinary in me no longer sees it at all? That question follows people long after relationships end. It appears in quiet rooms, empty evenings, long walks, moments when nobody is around. Because rejection leaves behind an echo. It makes people wonder whether their value existed in the first place or whether it only existed while somebody else was looking at them. And maybe that is the cruelest part. Your value may never have changed. Only their ability to see it did. But when somebody's attention becomes your mirror, their blindness begins to feel like your disappearance. And people can spend years trying to become visible again. Trying to become important again. Trying to become unforgettable again. All because somebody slowly stopped looking at them the way they once did. The tragedy is that most people do not notice the damage until much later. They only realize how much of themselves they abandoned when the relationship is already gone. They look back and see every compromise, every silence, every swallowed feeling, every moment they pretended not to be hurt. And they discover that rejection did not begin the day someone left. It began the day they started shrinking themselves to avoid being left. Because the moment they reject you, your value does not actually change. What changes is the mirror you have been using to measure it.